You see any on the horizon? You don't have to name names if you don't want to, but...
Look, history tells you that when the situation is called for, the leadership steps up. But if you would say to me, do you think it will get worse before it will get better? My answer, unfortunately, is yes.
Well, we need people like you running for Prime Minister.
No, I tell you, I run Unilever, and I'm quite happy to do that. Yes.
But let me ask both of you a question, because I'm an American, but I'm thinking about moving to a country outside of the U.S.
Yes.
And I'm also an investor, and I'm always looking for places to invest.
If I lived in Western Europe today, I would spend all my time investing in Eastern Europe, and also partly in Russia, Ukraine, Turkey and so forth.
Well, to Turkey, if you don't mind, Mark, let me just, I would have solved your problem by bringing in Turkey and forgetting the 10. Maybe bringing in the 10 someday, but Turkey is 70 million people. It's a huge market. I would have started there.
No, I think that at the moment, I think it's right that we bring in the 15. We have been reminded by the Balkans recently how fragile lasting peace can still be. So we don't want something to flare up in one of these newly countries who join us. So I think we've secured that. And I think after Bulgaria and Romania, our next big task is Turkey. And at the same time, we must ensure that the countries surrounding Europe will prosper economically. But let me say that for Europe, Turkey is essential. Because in geopolitical terms, a Europe with Turkey makes a hell of a difference of a Europe with a Turkey against Europe. It will serve our relationships with the Middle East. It will serve our relationships with North Africa. And by the way, it will be a great help to make sure that the Muslim communities which have taken root in Europe will integrate into these societies rather than being in danger of radicalizing and marginalizing. So I think Turkey is essential for the future of Europe.
Well, you and I happen to agree 100% on Turkey, only I would bring them in a lot faster than you would. But you have views on Turkey?
Yes, of course I would bring in as many countries as possible, including probably Ukraine and eventually Russia, and then the name will have to change, that it's no longer right. Europe, but it's kind of the empire of Western and Eastern territories of the world.
So then Europe goes to war with Asia. But let's go back to Turkey.
No, I'm not saying that.
Let's stop with Turkey.
Not necessarily, because I think that what we have in Europe is a great deal of tolerance, especially this generation. Secondly, I think what we would have to do also is bring in the North African countries, in other words, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt into the Union eventually.
So Europe is going to take over the world?
Not take over the world, but I think we can have a bloc that will have free trade, a common currency, where economic development can accelerate significantly, because the more different two countries are in their level of economic development when they join a union, the more favorable it is for the union. If two countries join partnership that have the same level of standards of living and economic development, nothing changes.
But Mark, so the bureaucrats in Brussels, which you cannot do anything right, are suddenly going to be running this empire that's just taken in 10 new countries, and they're going to bring in the Turks and the UK. How's this going to work?
Well, you know, step by step.
Don't.
Look, so many people have said when the Eurozone came about, it will never work. When the Eurodollar came about, it will never work. And I have to tell you, I grew up in the 50s and 60s. I came to the Netherlands the first time in maybe 1970. I was at that time working for a stockbroker selling securities, American securities, to pension funds and the banks. I have to say today, I think that Europe is a much better place than when I was studying and when I started to work. It is more open. You don't need to change money all day long when you travel from one country to another. People from the north have gone to Spain and Spaniards are elsewhere. In Switzerland, when I grew up, people always cursed the Italians. Now the Italians have assimilated. Everybody curses now the Turks and the Yugos, but it doesn't matter. Eventually they'll assimilate, and so we have a much better society eventually.
A celebration of diversity, that's what I call
Yes.
it. And I think that's what it has to be. That is the strength and the positive side of Europe. Now, as you know, all positives have a negative, and we have to be fearful of it, and we must make sure that we have a constitution in Europe, and that we have a governance in Brussels who can tackle these issues. Now, on your question, how will Brussels be able to govern such an entity? By making sure it only deals with those issues which need a European approach. That means the maximum of decisions should be taken back in the countries as close as possible to the people who concern it.
Well, that sounds like heaven. I mean, that sounds like that'd be perfect. Then I would want to move to Europe. In that kind of Europe, I would like for my wife and I and my baby to move to Europe. But will that really happen? Can it happen? Bureaucracies always run amok.
Well, this of course is the challenge. And you'll have to accept from an American perspective that Europe always looks messy.
Well, so does America.
It's 3 paces forward and 2 paces backward.
But Tony, you yourself said that you're not abiding by the Lisbon Pact, you're not having the research, you're not having the innovation in Europe that other places are having, that Asia's having. How much time is there for Europe to do all of these things with a declining birth rate and problems?
Leadership will become very important. We will need the leaders who speak the language of the citizens of Europe and who can make these things clear. That if we continue to invest 50 billion euro every year in agricultural subsidies, yes, which is half the European budget, yes, half of the budget which we have in Europe, we're investing in subsidies. And with all respect which I have for farmers, and I have a great deal of respect for farmers, but you can't label agriculture as tomorrow's technology. But we're investing 50 billion. At the same time, the scientists of France are going to the streets and striking because there is not enough money to invest in the technologies of tomorrow. Well, this imbalance has to stop. And I'm afraid this is where political leadership comes in. People who have the courage to explain this to the peoples of Europe.
Tony keeps talking about leadership. I mean, I haven't pressed him to name names yet. Do you see it happening in Europe? Do you see anybody coming up and saying, hey guys, we've got to stop giving $50 billion to French farmers and other farmers? Have we got to start doing something about it? Do you see it happening?
Well, at heart I'm an anarchist, so I'm anti-government in the first place. I think the world would be much richer without governments. So I don't see really the leadership improving dramatically. I think what will eventually happen is that Europe realizes unless it gets its acts together, unless government shrinks, in other words, the size of the government shrinks, and unless people start to work harder for lower wages and for lower compensation, they lose out against Asia. But I mean dramatically. The same will happen in the US. Because look, if the scientists in Paris demonstrate because they don't get enough money for science, they should go and see once for what kind of compensation science is carried out in India and in China. They don't go and demonstrate on the street to get subsidies from the government. They do it on their own, in their own garage and so forth.
I understand. I am saying to you, why do you think that Europe is going to change? Do you think the scientists in France are going to go to India? Or the people in France are going to continue to demonstrate and say to the politicians, give me more, give me more, give me more, and they're going to get it?
Look, yes, Europe has a great capacity for change. If you look out throughout the history of Europe, yes, the mere fact that we're bringing in 15 countries, yes, is already a demonstration of our ability to adopt. 15 years ago, this would have been inconceivable, and now we're doing it. So don't underestimate Europe when it comes to its capability to change. However, and I would agree with you, the point you are making about that people have to learn to work harder. I mean, we just had a survey across Europe, and 60% of the people in some countries, if you ask them what is your great dream, and their great dream is that the day they retire. Yes, that's their great dream. If you ask this in the US or in China, they want to be entrepreneurs, yes? They want to get on in life, and this is what we have to change, yes?
So why are you so optimistic, and who's going to pay for those retirees? You don't let the immigrants in. You desperately need immigrants. If I were Europe, I would give those immigrants plane tickets. I would say, come on to Europe, but you won't let them in.